Hi, in case you don't know me, my name is Arlene and I'm a member here at King's Church. When I was asked to do my testimony, I originally said, no, I'm not ready. And when asked again, I thought, why not? I can do this. It won't be that hard. Man, I want to tell you that was a challenge, both emotionally and mentally. Going through the highs and lows of your life triggered memories that you had buried for years. Some of those memories come back like they happened yesterday. So how do you condense almost 57 years in a short testimony? You write your story, edit it 1,000,000 times to focus on the key points, and acknowledge there were chapters that could be written between those points. I thought I'd start with a verse that keeps showing up for the last few years. When my father-in-law died, I found out that my parents and my in-laws both had the same wedding text. In the Canadian Reformed Church, you could ask the pastor to preach at your wedding on a text that meant something to you. Their text came from Deuteronomy 33:27, the first part. The eternal God is your refuge, and underneath are the everlasting arms. Looking back on my life, I see this text as an accurate reflection of my life. I was adopted as a baby along with my 2 brothers, as my parents couldn't have children. I spent the first 7 years of my life living in Quebec. My parents were Christian and they raised me to love Jesus and to try and live for him. On the outside, our family fit the part, but in reality, it looked quite different for many years. My dad was an alcoholic for most of my childhood. I didn't even know what alcoholism was, but I do remember several car accidents and a bunch of other bad things related to his drinking. My mom would always say, he's not feeling well, or he's just sick. My parents grew up in a culture that never talked about things like this. You wouldn't mention it outside the house. During this time, drinking and driving wasn't frowned upon like it was today. Cars at that time didn't have seatbelts either. Even though I was young and didn't realize it at the time, those everlasting arms were protecting us. When we lived in Quebec, my parents also fostered. I remember a little girl, Doris, and her brother, Robbie, came to live with us. Doris was 5 and very clingy. She always wanted my mom's attention, and when I went to my mom, she pushed me away. They stayed with us for a while and then left, but even after they left, I didn't go to my mom anymore when I needed things. I got used to going to my dad. At 7 years old, we moved to Ontario because Quebec wanted people to speak French, and my dad wasn't having that. My dad started his own business after we moved and wasn't around that much. As time went on, my relationship with my mom became more and more distant. My dad's drinking continued, but now my neighborhood friends and I had access to free booze. There were bottles hidden all over the place. I'd also started smoking, and because my dad would get drunk and pass out, I had unlimited free cigarettes. I went to a Christian elementary school as well as a Christian high school. Elementary school I did really well, but by the time I hit high school, life had changed a lot. My mom and I were constantly fighting. My older brother could do no wrong, and I didn't want to be home. Life at home always made me sad and angry, so I do everything possible not to be there. At the end of grade 8, my mom had an operation on her legs, and after she was released from the hospital, she and my aunt came to pick us kids up and told us we weren't going home. She was done with my dad's drinking. And we spent that summer floating from aunt and uncle's houses until one day my dad called and said we could go home because he was going to rehab in Hamilton. My dad got sober and never touched the stuff again. My dad had repented from that lifestyle and was involved in church studies and leadership again. Things seemed somewhat normal for a while. I started grade 9 in a Christian high school and got in with the wrong crowd, and life became about the party. Mickey's of Southern Comfort were quite often tucked into my sock, and smoking pot or hash became a regular thing. 2.5 years after my dad stopped drinking, he got his cancer diagnosis. I watched him go through treatments, get so sick, and I was angry at God. Didn't seem fair after all he'd overcome. It was during this time, just before my 17th birthday, that I was asked to house and dog sit for friends that lived in Oakville. I was told that if I had any questions or troubles, I could talk to the neighbor couple because they were kind people and could be trusted. One evening I was invited to a barbecue there along with a few other people. I went, I had a good time, and they watched me until I got safely back into the house next door. About 45 minutes later, there was a knock on the door, and I saw it was a neighbor man, and I opened the door. Before I knew what was happening, he grabbed me, dragged me to a room down the hall, and violently raped me. He told me if I told anyone, they wouldn't believe me, and he'd kill me. I called my mom the next morning to see if she could pick me up, and she couldn't. She was busy with work and taking care of my dad. I couldn't tell her or my dad because he was so sick, so I stayed for the next 2 nights, terrified and feeling extremely alone. I felt dirty, unlovable, and again, so alone. And somehow in my messed up mind, I felt like I might have done something to make it my fault. When my friends got home, I never went back there, and to this day, I will never drive down that road again. After this, I spiraled, drinking a lot, smoked a lot of hash, suffered with eating disorders, and ended up seeing the doc and going on antidepressants as I had many suicidal thoughts. I knew I had to get past this, so my strategy was I'd never let anyone hurt me like that again, and I trusted no one. This would work sometimes for months or even years. Just when you think it's all in the past, a movie, a certain touch, or just a flashback would trigger you, and it would come back as it happened yesterday. After this, my dad got sicker and the cancer spread throughout his body. Nothing more could be done for him, so we moved a hospital bed into the house because he wanted to die at home. He was in and out of a morphine-induced coma. I was praying for a miracle. He was my person, and I didn't want him to die. I sat with him for hours. He would randomly wake up and mumble, "Read me about the shepherd I don't want." During this time, I was struggling with, is Jesus really real? Why were really bad things happening, especially in regards to my dad? Sunday morning, December 1st, 1985, he died. That morning, my dad, who wasn't able to move without assistance, sat up. My mom told him to let go, he was going home. He looked past her at the ceiling and his eyes got so big and bright, he smiled like nothing I'd ever seen before. Nodded and lay back down and died. I know whatever he saw that morning was something so beautiful. I believe it was heaven or Jesus coming to take him home. I never doubted there was a God again. After his death, I started to see the real comfort in knowing if he had died and the life he was living a few years before, I don't know if he would have been in heaven with his Savior. My mom focused on work and my older brother after he died, and my younger brother and I became closer as he was only 14 when Dad died. Just over a year after this happened, I started seeing a guy I worked with. We started dating, but I had to keep it from my mom. Dating a guy outside of the Canref church was really frowned upon. I dated him for a while and ended up getting pregnant at 19. He said he wasn't ready to be a father and offered me money for an abortion. I respected his decision not to be part of her life, but I knew I wasn't getting rid of her. I told my aunt I was pregnant first and then my mom. I knew this was either going to make or break my relationship with my mom. She told me I could live at home and pay her rent and stay there. April 28th, 87, I had a beautiful baby girl, a whopping 10-pounder. As I held her, I promised her that she would never feel unloved or not enough. This applied to our other 3 kids as well. For the first year and a half of her life, it was just Nicole and I. In the spring of 1988, I started seeing my now husband, who knew me most of my life as his little sister, was my best friend. We got really close really fast, and I became pregnant with our second child. We were married December 2nd, 1988, and our daughter Tanya was born June 26, 89. I'm not proud of the way our marriage started, but very thankful for the 36 years of marriage we had. We had another daughter 3 years later, Ashley. And then there's a 6-year gap, and we had our son, Michael. A few years after Mike was born, my husband was self-employed, building a huge cottage on Stony Lake in the Kawarthas. Only a couple weeks into the job with a new crew, they were pushing up a gable wall realized there wasn't enough strength between them to get it up. They started walking the wall back down, and when the guys were clear, Fred tried to jump clear, almost made it, but the weight of the 1,500-pound wall came down and crushed his heel. This led to 4 years of operations and nursing at home. Doctors gave him forms to go on disability, but anyone who knows Fred knows he wasn't having it. This meant a crash course in wound care for me, shipping the kids off to his parents during the week so I could drive them north and take care of him while the job continued. These years created a lot of financial stress and worry, but God provided for our daily needs. We got behind with the government, sold our home, paid our debt, and ended up moving to Williamsford in 2006. We moved a lot in our marriage as my husband was a builder, so we'd buy power sale or needed a lot of work type houses. This house was by far the worst, but Fred got it done. We barely settled there, and we moved mid-November. As we moved mid-November, and our son Michael needed major abdominal surgery. 10 days at McMaster and we were home again, finally. We also had to leave our oldest in Burlington as she was starting college. This broke me. We were supposed to stay together. It took a lot of years to be able to be content with this move. But I believe nothing happens by chance, and God has a purpose in everything, even when we don't see it. Nicole lived with my mom, and they got very close. They still have a special bond that I never had with my mom, and I'm very thankful for that. Nicole finished school, graduated with honors, and met Dwayne, the love of her life, in 2009. A man who loves God, and we couldn't have been happier. On March 2nd, 2013, our son was homesick from school, and I also started feeling unwell. I had crazy ear pressure that seemed to simmer down when I drank water. It gradually got worse during the day, but I dismissed it as an ear infection. Mike called Fred, who was in Durham, by the time I agreed to go to a hospital. Fred took me to Markdale. They did a blood test, checked my ears, EKG, and then the doctor talked to Fred, asking him what kind of recreational drugs I was using. He replied, "She hardly drinks, let alone uses drugs." I was released from Markdale, and the next day we went to Grimsby to attend my niece's engagement party. We stayed at my oldest daughter's, and when I came up the stairs the next morning, she said to Fred, "Take Mom to the hospital before she dies in my living room." They did another blood test, and I continued to drink water when the pressure got high until the test results came back. I ended up in the ICU there in Grimsby. I had a heart attack. Went to Hamilton for an angio, and they told me I needed a quadruple bypass at 45. The night before surgery, a doctor came to talk to me and explained that normally these things go well, but asked if I had my affairs in order, as there was always a risk to heart surgery. I remember this stress that night, thinking I don't want to die, my kids need me, as my son was only 14. I remember praying for peace in whatever happened. Looking at the Bible app, and the verse, "I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength," popped up. This text carried me through the surgery and the recovery after. One of my daughters put this on a sign for me, and it still hangs in my house, reminding me that it's only through Christ who gives me strength, that no matter what happens, He's in control. I got home, and shortly after, our daughters, Tanya and Ashley, both told us that they had set their wedding dates and they were exactly 29 days apart. I was convinced they were trying to do me in. Kidding, I was very thankful to be there to witness both weddings to godly men in September and October of that year. It wasn't long before they shared that they were both pregnant. We had 3 grandkids through Nick and Dwayne already, and we were over the moon with this news. Heartache came when we found out that Tan and Vince had miscarried, and now Ash and Matt, at almost 21 weeks, were having problems with that pregnancy. Ash was taken by ambulance to McMaster, and a procedure was done on September 10th, 2014, Matt's birthday. I will never forget driving down there and sitting beside that bed as Matt prayed for this baby and acknowledged that this child belonged to God, but prayed if it was if it was God's will, God would allow them this opportunity to raise this child. I had a whole new respect for this man. The procedure worked, and exactly a week later, I got a call from Matt that Ash wasn't doing well, and he was taking her to Mac again from their home in Hagersville. Try to get down there fast enough to be with them, unsure of what was going to happen. When I got there, little Levi had just left this earth to be back with his father in heaven. That little boy lived for almost 2 hours, and his parents got to meet him and spend a little time with him. A few days later, her family and Matt's family gathered around the grave and laid Levi's body to rest in the comfort of knowing we will see him again. I stayed with Ash for a few days and dealt with anger and sorrow that God would allow these kids to suffer such pain when they love God with all their hearts. You don't want your kids to hurt as a parent. You want to make it better, but I couldn't. I remembered Matt's prayer in the hospital and thought, who am I to question God's plan in this? If Levi's own father could pray for this child that he acknowledged was not his, but a gift from God, then who was I to be angry? It's times like this that you're forced to your knees. You're forced to trust in his plan and to look to him for comfort. The blessing in this awful experience was they were able to diagnose the issue, and Ash and Matt were blessed with 2 beautiful little boys after this. Vince and Tanya struggled with fertility, and after some time they had a beautiful daughter, a granddaughter, Annabelle. Mike moved to Niagara area. He had his own personal challenges, but through Christ, he got his life back on track. Married his beautiful wife, Samantha, and our parents to our adorable little Skylar. Skylar will be 1 June 29th, and we are eager to celebrate with her, Mike and Sam. Skylar was born with dilated cardiomyopathy, the same condition her mom has. And you don't want to Google it. Google is not your friend. And even in her short life, has had some challenges. She had another cardio appointment, and her heart is now operating on the low side of normal. This was huge news as she continues to excel, and that our prayers were answered again. After Mike moved out, we sold our house in Williamsburg, and with the equity of that one, Fred was able to build the home we're in. We lived in a camping trailer behind this now house for 2 years. Anytime I complained about frozen feet or frozen toilet or a faulty wiring incident, Fred was quick to remind me to embrace the adventure. When we moved into this area after growing up in Burlington, I said I'd never live in the middle of the bush, in the middle of the bush on a dirt road, and here we are rocking it. One phrase I never care to hear again is, "Oh, come on, it's fun. We just need to embrace the adventure." Now I look back, and that's kind of like life. Embrace that adventure, trust in God, and whatever happens is in his control and his timing. Over the years, God's led me down many paths, spending time with the handicapped in a Christian group called Friendship. Them teaching me different things. Although it was sometimes challenging, these people taught me so much about unconditional love, kindness to each other, and a very simple childlike faith. When that group ended through COVID and the retirement of the couple that led it, I was sad, but God had a plan. After COVID lockdown, we left the church that we grew up in and started attending King's Church and felt our faith being revitalized. In the last year, I became connected with a young woman who lived in downtown Owen Sound in an abusive relationship. She left that relationship, ended up in a shelter, and then on the streets, pregnant and using. I'd lose touch with her for short periods of time, but I always ended up reconnecting, either through her calling me from the mental health ward, running into her in the streets, or at Safe and Sound. After her last day at the hospital, she told me she was going to go out and live near the coast with the father of her first child. She had about a month and a half before her due date when she left the hospital. She had a beautiful boy at the end of April. Previous to having him, she was told that her baby would have to be born in London's NICU because of her using while pregnant. That little boy was born healthy. He needed no help, not even oxygen. We prayed for protection over her and her unborn child, and God answered those prayers. she's still clean and acknowledges the gift that she has and the opportunity to be a mom to her 8-year-old daughter and her newborn son. I am so thankful to God for what he's doing in her life and her acknowledgement that this is a blessing from God. Still in regular contact with her, and her baby are thriving, and her family. Now, through her story, I believe God has given me a heart for the homeless and for those who battle addiction and abuse. The last few weeks, a friend and I have started making lunches for the homeless, the abused, and those struggling with addiction. He has shown me that there is hope through grace for these human beings too. We've seen it here with my friend, Tyler, and others who have shared their testimonies. With my childhood and alcohol abuse, I could have easily ended up in the same spot they are. And it's just by God's grace that I didn't end up on the streets. We shared in the grief of our sister-in-law committing suicide because of her mental health and alcoholism, and a nephew overdosing and dying. Just making connections, a sandwich, a few snacks, and going slowly gaining trust goes a long way. A simple God bless, or I've been praying that God will protect you and give you your daily needs as a start. A lot of these people have been burned and don't trust anyone, and I get that. Just recently I met a man named Jimmy at a local motel. The first week we made lunches. He was an older guy, early 60s, and so friendly. He sat outside most of the day looking out for the people that lived there. Jimmy shared a story, and it was a sad one. Jimmy was dependent on others for getting what he needed because his legs didn't work, and that included his booze, as that was his weakness. 10 days ago he was drinking, and when he got drunk, someone gave him fentanyl. He was gone before anyone could help him. He would say, God bless you and people like you, so I took comfort in knowing he acknowledged God. Going there last Friday and seeing the impact Jim had on these people touched me deeply. Back to my friend Danny. She had this tattoo that really stood out. It was on her forearm and it said, "You are enough." She grew up thinking and being told she was never enough. And I get that too. It took me a long time to see it. You don't need to be enough for people. If you trust God and put your hope in Jesus, you'll always be enough to him. I'm at peace knowing my mom taught me to read my Bible, gave us a Christian education, and fostered that love for Jesus in us. The Lord willing, she'll be 90 years old next Saturday, and in the last couple of years, I feel closer to her than I have my whole life. So now here we are, 36 years married by the grace of God. Was it perfect? No. But looking back, my husband talks about this invisible rope that would never let us get too far, always pulling us back in, and that is God. We both see this and are thankful to God for never letting go of that rope. Our marriage has always had its foundation in Christ. Christ, my husband, then my kids. This formula has worked for us. He's always been there through it all. We have an especially close relationship with all 4 of our kids and their families. And again, I'm so thankful for the daily texts, phone calls, FaceTimes, etc. that we have with them. They want to talk with us. They want to hang out with us. And although we never stop being parents, now that they're all older and have their own families, they're like best friends, and we realize how great a gift that is. I'm thankful they know they can call us any time of the day or night, and have. Those everlasting arms pushed us when we needed to be pushed, pulled us back when we needed to be pulled, and held us during those times of sadness, stress, impatience, and sorrow. Those everlasting arms always provided us with our daily needs and continue to do so. Like I said, it's been 36 years together, sometimes a wild ride. But we know if we surrender to him, he carries us. We've learned to trust in his perfect timing, to be content wherever he's put us. We've learned that pushing forward on our own or not trusting in him and trying to fix things ourselves, we always ended up screwing it up. God gave me a partner that I loved, and I'm so thankful. I'm also thankful for my church family and the people we've come to see as extended family and the connections we've made here. If anyone has come to these testimony nights and has been encouraged but hasn't put their trust in Jesus, I would encourage you to do so. When you do this, he meets you where you're at, and only he will protect and guide your life. You may have a few bumps in the road, but that's okay. He'll help you get back on track. Everyone's journey and walk with the Lord is different. It's only through his grace that we are redeemed and restored by him alone. God never promised us an easy life, but he did promise that if we put our trust in him, it will be worth it. That's it.